Welcome back to the Cloud Native Telco Summit, part of our DSP Leaders coverage, and time now for our live Q&A show. I'm Guy Daniels, and this is the third of our 3 Q&A shows. It's your final chance to ask questions on cloud native issues. Whatever you like, send them in now. But you need to act fast. Don't leave it too late. Use the form on the website. And also, don't forget our audience poll. Today is the last chance for you to vote. So let's meet our guests, and we have a full lineup to end our summit. Joining us live on the program today are Bejoy Pankajakshan, who is EVP, Chief Technology and Strategy Officer for Mavenir. Warren Bayek, who is Vice President Technology at Wind River. Fatih Nar, who is Chief Technologist, Telco Partner Solutions for Red Hat. Beth Cohen, SDN Product Strategies at Verizon. Leon Timon, Client Principal, Global Telco Practice for Dell Technologies. And Luis Velarde Tazon, who is Head of Cloud and Infrastructure, Global IT CTIO at Telefónica. Hello everyone, good to see you all, welcome back. Now, we have a slightly later than usual start for this final Q&A show, so let me dive right into the questions. So here's our first one. How can a telco avoid or minimize disruption to their organizations during the move to cloud native? Do they need to clear out old practices and start anew? Luis, are you able to help us out with this one?
Yes, Guy. Yes, the move to the cloud native world is a journey. It will not happen overnight. It will take some time, and actually existing solutions will be there for some time. We are not just starting from everything all of a sudden. So it will happen step by step, and there's several steps. The first one will be to have the stacks ready. We need the virtualization stacks to incorporate the required capabilities by the telco applications, either the public or the private environments virtualization stacks. They need to incorporate, for instance, data plane acceleration capabilities or enhanced security capabilities specific for the telco cloud workloads. That's the first step. Additionally, we will need to incorporate or adapt our existing operational processes, because the cloud native is a world where there's additional complexity. The sharing of resources by different applications, having common platforms for all the applications drives to additional complexity. So we need to incorporate, modify, adapt our existing operational processes. Once these things are there, we have the stacks and the processes ready, then we will start migrating workloads. And the existing applications or workloads will have to be adapted or made ready to be migrated. So this is the next step. And the final step is that where eventually the new applications, not the existing ones that have been modified and migrated and integrated into these existing stacks, the new applications will then start being designed as cloud native by default, with portability in mind, with elasticity in mind, and all the requirements of cloud native. So these are the steps: having everything ready, start migrating existing workloads, and then design as cloud native by default. And this is going to take us time. It will not happen from today to tomorrow.
No, indeed not. Thanks very much, Luis, for very good and clear advice there. Right, we're going to go around a lot of our guests for this question. So, Fatih, let's come across to you next for your thoughts about how telcos can minimize any possible disruption.
Thank you. I think Luis put together very well. You don't need to wipe all the memories you have that you accumulated over time. If the knowledge still makes sense, if the knowledge is not obsolete, you should still use that knowledge and experience to build your best practices. I think that one of the key enablers in our age is to adopt the cloud native practices and best practices, and designing blueprints is mainly around leveraging the open source technologies as much as you can, because that's going to give you a freedom of choice when you would like to switch your infrastructures from one vendor to another vendor. And also having open source empowering you for cloud native Also think about enabling your people for upskilling them with the right technology, with the right hands-on capabilities. To do that, I think one of the best things that has been happening in our industry is giving importance to the certifications of the people. And to reach that level, people try to get more hands-on experience with the systems and open source technologies. So TLDR, open source technologies, and the enabling your people with the right capabilities is the key for new best practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatih. That's great. And let's go across down to Leon now. Leon, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, we've been helping enterprise customers over the last 15 years through this shift in operating model from call it a brownfield model or brownfield architecture into a greenfield architecture towards cloud and cloud native technologies. And what we've seen is a brownfield ITIL-based operating model is not necessarily compatible with a cloud native or cloud operating model that most of our enterprise customers have been implementing for their greenfield operations. So there's got to be a shift in the operating model. There's got to be a transition in the teams to move from brownfield to greenfield, training, leveraging open source technologies, leveraging tools, as was said previously, is an important part of that transition. But we cannot keep the old business processes and think that we're going to be leveraging or gaining the benefits of cloud native. We've got to shift our operating model.
Great. Thank you, Leon. Shift the operating model. Beth, you're our second telco on the panel. Have you got any advice as to whether disruption is inevitable?
Disruption is definitely inevitable, but there are ways to minimize it. I want to pick up on some of the things that Leon and Fatih said related to greenfield and brownfield. I would say rather than starting from the lift and shift, i.e., the existing applications and bringing them over first, I think our approach has been to build the new applications cloud native. Build those skill sets in greenfield situations. I mean, 5G, for example, was heavily cloud native. And you can see it in the open source community and the standards bodies, and then moving back into the existing applications and then making a decision. Should you just throw them away? You don't need them anymore. Just replace them, or do you do a lift and shift, or do you do re-architecture? And each of those decisions, have cost benefits and cost to them. So you need to think, more holistically about that. There are, and I've said this before, there are components that will never change because they are just too expensive to move, and you need to work around them. And that's the databases that underpin all of these operations, because they don't affect the bottom line of any telco, and they're enormously expensive and enormously complex. So basically, we're going to not destroy decades worth of work. We're just going to continue using these, but we need to add new ways to access them and evolve them over time. So you really need to think hard to minimize the disruption, but it will cause at least some disruption, and I've seen that, particularly around the training and operational skills. Learning about virtualized, learning about cloud native, that has been a learning process, an educational process for our teams.
Great, thanks very much, Beth. And Bejoy, let's come across to you next for your thoughts about the whole issue of disruption and whether or not you can build or start anew.
Yeah, so maybe take a step back on what was driving the cloud nativeness, right? So this is not something new for the telco operators and vendors. It's just the definition of cloud native seems to have switched, because before we went to containers, microservices, there was a whole open stack, and people used to pitch OpenStack as cloud native. it kind of failed miserably on the operator side, just because at the end, after you deployed these in OpenStack containers, if you're not able to share the infrastructure, scale the applications as needed based on time of the day and usage, all you would have done is done a bold make and shift and migrated the workloads to be cloud native, but ultimately not realizing the benefit of having gone cloud native, which is really where the 80-20 sort of rule applies, right? If you look at an operator network, 80% of the traffic is probably carried by 20% of the sites. So this is what's the reality. So if you're dimensioning the network to be carrying traffic with the same sort of static workloads across the entire network and not really using the benefit of cloud nativeness, such as scaling, auto upgrades, and bringing the network up and down on demand as needed, then you're not really utilizing the benefit of having gone cloud native. So the integration into the automation tools is one key factor to realizing it, but at the same time, planning ahead for workloads in which you could truly utilize the scaling and thereby realize the benefit of having gone to the cloud native path is equally important.
Yeah, absolutely. Planning ahead. Thanks very much, Bejoy. And let's go across to Warren for Warren's thoughts on this question.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm the last to weigh in here, and I'll hark back to some things that Fad and Leon said, and something I've repeated often in this space, which is telcos aren't the first industry to make this shift. And other industries and other companies have done it successfully, made this, and it is disruptive. There's no question about that. But the key, I think, to making it less disruptive and more successful, as we just heard from Bejoy, to realize the benefits, I think it's important that telcos lean on their partners who have gone through this transformation, who have used cloud native technology and use cloud native and have a cloud native culture and a cloud native mindset. Use them and lean on those relationships to figure out what's best for their individual requirements. And we've seen this very, very successfully implemented at Verizon with our rollout there. Verizon has leaned on the partners who have been down this journey before, and it's been a pretty successful transformation. So collaboration, again, I say it over and over in this space, collaboration is going to be the key to getting through this disruptive process and making it beneficial on the far side, so we can see the 5G promises that we all made to each other actually come to fruition.
Thanks very much, Warren. Lots of great advice from all of you on that question. Thanks so much. Well, let's move on because we have another intriguing question here. Let me read this one out for you. Is there a template for how to structure a cloud native telco team? What roles do we need to have and how do all of them interact? And is there any advice available that is specific to telecoms? Well, Beth, do you have any advice that's specific for telecoms here?
Yes. So, having gone through the transformation and continuing to going through the transformation, I think it's super important, particularly in the telco space, to have proper project management. And that sounds like, that's bread and butter. But telcos live and breathe project management, and we really utilize it, very effectively. And absolutely, we need to build the engineer skills, and take the skills that our engineers have around networking, and extend it into software development, extend it into DevOps. That's a whole different mindset, and we need to make sure that our teams are integrated. And to do new work. I know I participated in the Virtual Network Services project, which of course is now our Virtual Network Services product. And the way we did it is we created a team. I think there was about 25 people on it, from all different disciplines across the organization, from operations to network engineering to project management, to development, IT, billing, legal, you name it, across the organization, we had a representative. And that was something new to the company that we hadn't done before. And I think it worked spectacularly in the sense that we were able to pull together and create, a new way of thinking and a new product, that was, leading in the industry. And it was done because we brought together all these skill sets and really treated it like a skunk works. And so I think that's a really important aspect to during the life cycle of recreating and the industry and our systems, is to start small, pull it out from the day-to-day work, and then pull it back in over as it gets integrated into our daily operations and our in our business processes.
Thanks very much, Beth. Very interesting. And the value of internal collaboration as well there. Fatih, let's come across to you for your thoughts on this whole question about software teams and structure.
So obviously, I wouldn't say there's a single bullet to fit and address all the problems everywhere. So, however, through my experience with around the world with the many tier ones, there are common best practices I saw by means of how to structure the teams, starting from business side, that is offering services to the consumers and or enterprises. So there's a product management approach. Who owns the services? Who's making money for the telcos? That product management role is filling the gap between the business and the technology teams. On the technology teams, the close kind of on the elbow distance with the product management team are the solution architects, who foresees what are the ingredients of each service and how they are interacting with each other. So these roles have been there, but not necessarily collaborating closely each other. And throughout this cloud nativeness, solution architecture design, reference solution design had to start incorporating cloud native characteristics inside, such as elasticity, such as dynamic scaling, such as better observability, know what your systems are doing, how they are behaving. That is kind of rolling under the solution architecture role. Together with the solution architecture role, obviously there are DevSecOps teams who are pipelining the ideas in innovation into real products are there, who are the main stakeholders for delivering right software with the right hardened security guidelines to the field. And while doing so, you have to also wear the hat of quality assurance. Make sure whatever you're offering are telco grade, right? So I know many people don't like this term, but it is a reality because it's a regulated industry. You have to comply with a certain level of the service level agreements. So those are the key things. So good product management, good product ownership, together with the good solution design based on cloud native criteria, and incorporating the DevSecOps best practices into your service delivery pipeline. Those are the best couple of overlapping best practices I have seen from the field.
Great. Thanks very much, Fatih. A few more responses to go through now. So let's start with Leon. I think you wanted to come in with some comments on how structuring this cloud native team.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. And I'll just add to everything that was said is automation is key, right? Is key. And there's got to be an automation mindset from the entire cloud native team. And the way that we're seeing many of our customers leverage this technique is to ensure that the infrastructure layer, the cloud layer, is as engineered as possible, so that they don't have to necessarily have engineers focus on the infrastructure of the cloud layer, but they have engineers focused on developing new services and developing automation across the entire stack. So that organization, it's a DevSecOps model, as well as an SRE organization to focus on issues and quality assurance are the two major pillars. But if we are able to focus on a cloud platform across RAN, across edge, across core, and develop automation on the northbound side of that platform, our customers will be able to accelerate the adoption of cloud native.
That's what it's about. Thanks very much indeed, Leon. And Lewis, let's come across to you and your thoughts about structuring cloud native teams.
Yes, agreeing with everything that has been said so far. Of course, we need technology teams to manage this new architecture, and operation teams to manage the common infrastructure, provide observability, and manage the life cycle of the infrastructure, same as the life cycle of the applications. There's one additional role that is needed in this cloud native world, and specifically we are talking about cloud native using the public cloud, even though this will be extended to private cloud as well, is the role of FinOps. And this is a collaborative role per se, as per definition. So it's not only technology team, operations team, also financial teams need to be participating, because this elasticity, this dynamic provisioning needs to be managed in an efficient way, and not only cost efficient, in general efficient, to get the most out of this infrastructure for the business. So I think this role is a new role that needs to be managed. It's a collaborative role per se, and it becomes very important, the FinOps role.
Oh, absolutely, Lewis. We had a specific question about FinOps on yesterday's show, and I'm pretty sure we'll develop that into a standalone panel for our next summit. Absolutely. Bejoy, let's come across to you next for your thoughts.
Yeah, my view on this is there's been a lot of theoretical work done on what's the kind of org structure that's needed to be successful with cloud native transformation, leaning in from learnings from enterprises and other industries that's gone through that transformation. So, but one thing that we need to keep in mind is the best practices will vary from organization to organization. Telcos could claim that, okay, a lot of this has to be telco ready because it's regulatory. But then if the organizational structure is set in a way that you can't fast fail and try out new things fast enough, then ultimately the goal of having migrated to cloud native, which is to launch new services faster, get to lower OpEx, that sort of model does not succeed because you're still in a rigid organization, but that does not allow you to do that fast fail. So, for instance, if I'm picking on you, Beth, the Verizon's employees have been compensated on having only the best network performance, but not being penalized if there are certain KPIs that they miss because they're trying out new features in the network. And if that's going to be punitive to them, then they're not going to try those new features out in the network. So whatever transformation you went through in the network as a telco operator ultimately fails because you're not trying out new services fast enough. And I give the example of Netflix, which is a very, very large organization. So we've had conversations with them. For example, how would they run the network, or AWS run a network? And these organizations, which I granted they're not being regulated right now, as the telco industry is, but is still serving consumers globally and orders of scale much, much larger than the telco industry. And they know exactly at which point a customer will drop the service. So they could, if they have to try out a new service, for example, figuring out after the customer advocate agent that figures out that a user who's on a programming guide, after he sees a certain amount of TV shows, he skips it because he's just irritated and doesn't want to continue watching the ads there. You could actually autoplay. So this was something that we learned from Netflix as well, is they did the survey. It actually went all the way from the customer advocate directly to the R&D person who was responsible for that program. He was able to try it on a small segment of users, make sure that the adoption worked. And then because it was cloud native, they could roll it out in a much larger scale. And because the infrastructure is hosted in AWS in this case, it was much faster adoption. So what I'm saying here is that ultimately, if the telco operators go through all this transformation, but the organizations are not being set up in a way that actually incentivizes them to try out new services and realize the benefits of cloud native, then this is just another journey that would have happened. And you would have other OTT guys ultimately realize the benefit of having gone on a 5G network.
Joey, thanks very much for those comments. And before I'm going to come to Warren in a second, but I ought to just quickly nip back to Beth. Really, Beth, I'm sure you've want to add something to Bejoy's comment.
I do. I do. I think, ultimately, and Fatih mentioned it, we're a regulated industry. And more importantly, setting that aside, our customers and expect the service. The model that I always use is when you use your cell phone, you expect that call to go through 100% of the time. It's a different mindset. And yes, we do change, we do test things, we do have test markets, we do try things, but we have to do it in a different way. We cannot do it the way that Netflix does it. And we can't do it the way the gaming companies do it, which is, hey, throw it out there, see if it works. Doesn't, goes away. Those are very consumer focused. Our enterprise customers, do not think that way. They are very much focused on that SLA and the delivery of their SLA, and they're willing and able to pay a premium for that 100% SLA performance. And so the mindset, our operational mindset, has to be that way to meet those SLAs. And I don't think that's going to go away, anytime soon.
Thank you very much, Beth. Warren, I promised to come to you because the question is all about structuring a cloud native team here and whether there's any advice that's telecom specific. Have you got any additional comments for our audience there?
Yeah, I'll be brief, Guy. I could talk about the failsafe for a while, but I'll leave Beth's comments out there as very important. I think one thing overlooked, and I agree with everything that was said about the individuals and the teams that need to be built and turn to cloud native, the DevSecOps, the FinOps, the automation clearly is a massive thing that has to happen to make this work. But executive sponsorship is really important, in my opinion. Having an executive sponsor at the company who understands cloud native, believes in it, can pull the different teams together, understands the existing corporate structures and the existing corporate culture, and guide the corporation through the moves that have to be made is a really important aspect to think about. We do need leadership at that. We need leadership at that level to make sure that this journey, as it becomes rocky, which it will, there will be challenges, that there's an executive sponsor that can kind of guide the teams through the tough spots and make sure that they stay the course and have the long view that's required to make sure that we get to the end successfully.
Great. Thanks very much, Warren. And hold that thought about executive sponsorship. I'm going to come back to that in a moment or two. But let's move on to our next question. And this is coming from a global tier 1 operator. And the question is, it is not easy to switch incumbent legacy vendors, especially when vendors have different interpretations of cloud native. Can we ever have a comparative study in terms of cost and performance across the ecosystem so that we, the telcos, can accurately compare like with like? Leon, as a vendor representative today on our panel, what's your view on this question?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And, we are disaggregating and opening the network up, right? So we are promoting at Dell a open telecom ecosystem, where we actually call it the open telecom ecosystem community. Part of that endeavor is building out an open telecom ecosystem lab. And if you think about how we're disaggregating the network across RAN, edge, and core, right? It's the containerized and virtual network functions. It's the service and infrastructure automation and orchestration layers. We're talking about the cloud platform vendors. We have Red Hat and Wind River here, but we also work with VMware and Canonical and Microsoft and some of the hyperscalers. Then we've got the infrastructure layer, and we've got the accelerators and the underlying silicon. So there's a lot of combinations of components that we have to pre-certify and pre-test. And that's exactly why we built up this Open Telecom Ecosystem Lab, which is really a virtual lab because it's extensible into our customers' environments, into the NEP environments. We're working, very closely with Mavenir, but we're also working with Nokia and with Ericsson and with Samsung and with Fujitsu to ensure that we're testing performance, cost performance, SLA, developing automation across the entire stack. So it's the ecosystem coming together, opening up and disaggregating their proprietary cloud platforms, right, so that they can fit into this open stack. But then we're trying to disaggregate it back together in a common engineered platform. And we are, through the work that we're doing at OTEL, we do have access to a lot of the price performance benchmarking across many of the combinations that I have just discussed. So happy to share some of those insights directly with our customers.
Great. I'm sure they'll take you up on that one. Thank you very much, Leon. Warren, let's come across to you for your thoughts on this particular problem that our tier one operator has.
Yeah, I think that the ability to compare costs is difficult, as it mentions, because the cost of TCO goes way beyond implementation to operational costs and energy costs. And there's just so many facets to it. It is a difficult like-to-like comparison. But I liked everything Leon said about creating this open lab where we can test and create, and he has created the KPI capabilities to see how things are performing, to see how the cost is going to impact the entire system. In one sense, we're not theoretical anymore, right? We have some massive deployments worldwide, Verizon being the biggest multi-vendor deployment. So in one sense, you can look there and see, how they're doing and what the TCO and what the costs are. And Verizon wouldn't be continuing this massive growth scale of the virtual 5G environment that they've implemented if it weren't cost effective and performance efficient, right? So I think these things have been proven already in terms of getting things up and running. It will only become more and more efficient as more people jump in and the economies of scale kick into place. The accelerator technology is improving and the cost reductions there are pretty obvious. The energy consumption model is obviously very important now with the price of energy doing what it's doing. And it's such a flexible and non-deterministic cost for telcos. Reducing energy is on everyone's forefront. And we recently did some work last year with Intel and others, Radisys and Keysight and some others, to show how in this environment using PNC state changes, intelligent changes with the RAN applications, we can save up to 20% of server costs and server energy consumption. So I think there's a lot of possibilities going forward even to save money in the TCO sense. But at one level, it's already been proven. The cost efficiency and the performance capabilities are actually out in the real world. And, it's been proven. So it's not theoretical. And we don't, we'd be happy to help with studies as well. The OTEL lab is a great place to do that. But I ask people, you can look to the reality of what's actually been implemented in the field for an example of, one company that's made it work for them.
Thanks very much, Warren. Let me, it looks like there's a few more comments on this question. So let me go across first to Bejoy. Bejoy.
Yes, I think the question is interesting because it's something that we run into in our discussions with all operators. And it's challenging because there's not one industry, one organization that does this sort of a comparative study, especially on a cost basis. On performance, there is more so, but on a cost, because it's very sensitive data, there's a US government study, at least on the in support of the rip and replace, at least for cell sites, considering the radio mix, says what's the cost that operators are paying today. So there's some level of reference data available, at least for the RAN side. But if you look at an end-to-end network, and if you're trying to measure a specific setup, there's not one organization or industry that's actually doing it today in the telco market. But there are certain use cases which operators can baseline and they could start to share information. There are some work groups that do consider that sort of environment in which operators can share some of this data. But ultimately, for a specific tier one operator to do a comparative study of their vendors for their infrastructure, we could share baseline modeling tools, but the input varies significantly. What we've seen is from region to region, from operator to operator, and from use case to use case. So say, for example, if you're doing something that's just looking at a TCO study on the packet core side, you'd look at, is this packet core a converged packet core supporting 2G, 3G, 4G? What stage are they in the migration to standalone networks? What's the mix of vendors that's in there? How many of them are using acceleration strategy? Which ones are truly cloud native? And all of that changes if today operators are running in a CapEx model on network in their private clouds versus somebody like Dish, who's running it entirely in the public cloud on AWS, which then switches from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. And that's significantly different when you're doing the TCO comparisons, because OpEx for operator would involve headcount, electricity bills, it includes transport cost. A lot of those things gets pushed out to the public cloud person as an OpEx model. So the amount of variables that are involved here are varied. So to practically realize something like this, our recommendation would be to look at use case, look at the baseline scenarios, and then layer on the additional attributes that's specific to the operator. And then using the baseline model, input your specific numbers for CapEx and OpEx to get to that performance and cost view.
Great, thanks for that advice, Bejoy. Fatih, we'll come to you in a moment, but I just want to go to Beth next. Beth.
Yeah, I think it's boiling the ocean, essentially. I mean, it's entirely a moving target. I'll give you an example. I guess about a year and a half ago now, or maybe it was a year ago, we did a massive internal review of SASE operators. And it was a very large undertaking. And that's just one tiny aspect of the overall, our overall infrastructure. But, we were looking at all the current vendors and, and what their technical strengths were and their interoperability and their business models. And, all of that went into consideration. It took months. And you know what? A year and a half later now, what we did then is completely useless because everything's changed. And the market is rapidly changing. World conditions are rapidly changing. Risk factors change all the time. I know there was a mention of energy costs. Who knew that there was going to be a war in Ukraine? Starting a year and a half ago. So that so these things are almost impossible. We have to take it in a risk reduction and risk mitigation approach as much as we can. And the other factor, of course, is, and I think several people mentioned this, is there's way too many variables. And so any one of those variables can throw the predictions wildly off. So I think we just have to do our best and move forward. That's the best we can do.
Thanks, Beth. As you say, a lot of variables here. Fatih, let's come across to you for your comments.
So this question, in essence, is a comparison question. To compare A versus B, we got to understand what exactly we are comparing against these two options. So let's look at, as hinted before, look at what is the service that we are considering to make it cloud native. And we are considering to compare the total cost of ownership as well as the cost of migrating and running in a different perspective. For that, we got to draw the reference architecture. From there, we should run benchmarks to see the performance of it. While running benchmarks, you got to certify this solution going to run as expected or better than expected in comparison to what has been done before. So what I'm hinting, this is a process, as hinted, to compare one solution to another. But we already do that with our vendors, with our partners. We generated our certified CNF catalogs tested with the cloud native approach on our platforms, and we published those certification levels by means of what that certification means and what benchmarks has been done versus which Kubernetes distro or which release actually. So what I'm hinting is there is already really good studies and work by means of certifying CNFs that will kind of feed into this total cost of ownership or modernization effort cost comparison.
Yep, thank you, Fatih. That's great. Thanks, everyone, for all your comments. Wow, look at the time. It's really flying by. We have to look in on our audience poll, though. We can't forget that for the Cloud Native Telco Summit. 1 question, 7 answer options. And, of course, as we always say, you can pick whichever ones you feel are the most relevant. And the question we have been asking you this week is, Cloud Native is set to deliver substantial benefits to telcos, but what are the main challenges, to its adoption? And you can see the real-time votes right here. And these are the challenges that are identified. Looking at those votes, lack of internal skills is still out there in front as the main challenge. Legacy systems and apps not too far behind. And I did want to pick up on this executive sponsorship comment from Warren earlier. It's good to see that only 20% of you feel that insufficient support from the senior executive team is a challenge. So that's very encouraging. If you have yet to vote, then we are running out of time. We're keeping the polls open until the end of today, and then we will analyse the results on TelecomTV. Right, we still have time for a couple more questions, and I'm combining a couple of questions here. I do want to get in a couple more before we all leave. So let me put this first question to Warren, and it's a question that asks, are containers and microservices mature enough to handle telco workloads? And is Kubernetes still the best orchestration tool? Warren, what would you say to that?
Well, for the first question, performance, I touched on it in my previous answer. The answer is back. It's yes, right? We have it in the field live for over 2 years at Verizon. The virtual 5G rollout, once the system is up, running, configured, and which is no small task in this sort of a disaggregated multi-vendor environment, it performs flawlessly, right? Their call rates are sensational. They match the legacy, if not better. So that the performance question is sort of answered. Vodafone has had the same experience in a golden cluster configuration in Torquay and Exeter. They ran for a long time, proving that the call success rates were actually higher than legacy masts and better upload and download speeds across multiple spectrums. So the performance question of virtual and cloud native of RAN applications is asked and answered. In terms of Kubernetes being an orchestration, the right orchestration engine, I would say for the telco's case, Kubernetes has a place. The reasons we all know and love it in containers and cloud native is true for telco at some level, but the telco orchestration and lifecycle management requirements go well beyond what Kubernetes can provide. So orchestration solutions are emerging and are in place that supplant Kubernetes as a better telco lifecycle management platform. Now, the key is to implement those in a way that uses the benefits and the strengths of Kubernetes, but also brings in and adds and enables these additional features that telcos require, like RCA artifact collection and root cause analysis capabilities, system-wide visibility. Someone mentioned that you need to see what's happening in your whole system across geo distribution and potentially tens of thousands of end sites, user interfaces, upgrade scheduling and planning. These are all kinds of things that the new lifecycle management tools have to take into consideration. RBAC control, some things that are just handled a little bit differently in the telco environment that require a specific telco lifecycle management product that, while it uses Kubernetes, isn't necessarily a complete Kubernetes solution.
Let's go across to Fatih for comments. So my answer to this question is it depends. It depends what you're putting inside that container and what you're expecting out of that functionality. I saw a lot of bad examples such as putting gigantic container images. It's actually lift and shift PNF, physical network function, kind of squeezed into a container. Not necessarily it is a cloud native microservices design. It is literally the monolith inside a container. Does that container address our need? No. So that is that. So if you do proper microservices architecture-based solution design, and you also disaggregate and isolate each service independently for elasticity, for loosely coupling architecture, as in the 12-factor application modernization, then you may get benefits out of containers with telco workloads. The second part, the Kubernetes. Is Kubernetes good enough for telco? I would say no. The Kubernetes is a bare bone platform software. You need much more than that for telco workloads to be hosted on it, and by means of scheduling, running, as well as maintaining. For example, with Kubernetes, you will need an Artifactory. With Kubernetes, you will need a image scanning. With Kubernetes, you will need additional platform services that has to be added next to Kubernetes. That's where the OpenShift is coming to a picture. OpenShift is much more than Kubernetes, for example. We do deliver and supply all these functionalities needed by telco workloads.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Fatih. Let's go across to Bejoy.
So I'd say on the first part, it depends on the workload type as to whether Kubernetes is the right answer or not. Because if you're just looking at a stateful application that's fully microserviced and you're trying to scale and manage the workload and orchestrate it at the microservice level, Kubernetes autoscaler, as an example, works very well. Now, as given with any other tool, Kubernetes is one part of the ecosystem. You need, of course, other tools like Artifactory and others, as others have mentioned. But ultimately, what builds on top of Kubernetes is the requirement to have service-level orchestration. So if you have to do service-level orchestration, then just Kubernetes, which is managing at a Kubernetes service level, would not work. If you have to manage at a network function level or at a network service level, then you have to have a service-level orchestrator on top, which still works in tandem with the Kubernetes orchestration layer for the actual microservice scaling itself. So I'd say even if you bring in a service orchestrator, ultimately you're still dependent on some capabilities of Kubernetes to get the end-to-end service working. As to whether the Kubernetes layer is and the containers microservices are ready for telco workloads, I'd say it depends on the infrastructure layer. So for example, if you look today at private cloud deployments, pretty much all workloads, including the RAN workloads, which are more complex than the distribute unit, which is the DU unit, which has got strict timing requirements, very specific acceleration requirements. Those work today with an accelerated containerized environment, and it's deployed in multiple operator networks as well. But if you look at the same time on public clouds, take EKS or Google Anthos environment, which today supports hundreds of thousands of applications for enterprises and even for telco workloads, those still have some ways to, and some performance gaps as it stands today, to support some specific workloads, be it the DU on the RAN side or getting to very high performance with acceleration on the packet processing side. So it really depends on the infrastructure, whether you're dealing with a public cloud, standalone public cloud, a hybrid scenario for disaster recovery, or if it's all a private network deployment, in which case pretty much all the networks today support that sort of setup for telco workloads.
Great. Thanks, Bejoy. This is going to have to be our last question, I'm afraid, because we are running well over time now. So, Lewis, I'm going to come to you next, and then Leon, I think you wanted in. So, Lewis, let's get some thoughts for you. And the question was all about whether or not containers and microservices were mature enough, and the use of Kubernetes.
Okay. Considering the principles of a cloud-native architecture, the main principles could be dynamic provisioning and portability. Considering this, container is the right approach. So containers is designed just to allow portability, just to allow moving something from one place to the other, from different environments, from one to the other. So it is the right one. And Kubernetes is a right mechanism for orchestration of deployment of workloads. But is this enough? It's not enough. First of all, because as it has just been said just before, it's not enough to having a containers orchestration. It's not enough having a deployment orchestration. We need additional tools. We need service orchestration just to decide when we have to deploy an application, for instance, because before we actually initiate the orchestration of the deployment itself. So Kubernetes and containers is the right technology, but it's not enough. And is it mature enough? Kubernetes needs some requirements that still are not incorporated into the vanilla Kubernetes, let's say, or the well-known Kubernetes. And there are different initiatives trying to incorporate it, such as synchronization capabilities for the Open RAN workloads, data plane accelerators for UPF, for instance, data plane core workloads in 5G, and different other supporting different capabilities that are required by telco applications. So, is containers and Kubernetes the right approach? It is a good approach. It is the complete one? No, because it does not cover all the needs, and it is not created just to cover all the needs. Some requirements need to be added, and some additional tools need to be incorporated in the ecosystem.
Lewis, thanks very much indeed for that. Much appreciated. And Leon, do you want to wrap up our discussion for us today?
Sure. And I'll agree with everything that was just said, right? We need to complement Kubernetes with enterprise-grade, telco-grade capabilities. We need to add the automation. We need to ensure that it's fully integrated with the hardware, and we have an integrated lifecycle management to provide that day zero, day one, and day two experience for our customers. But also add one more thing about Kubernetes. As we disaggregate our networks, especially on the ORAN, right, on the RAN side, and disaggregate the RUs from the DUs from the CUs, there's an opportunity for our telco customers to start offering edge cloud services using the same infrastructure, the same cloud platform, to start monetizing the edge, whether it's through a private network or a dedicated network or leveraging their macro RAN. But this disaggregation and this common Kubernetes platform is going to enable the development of new services, particularly with the enterprise customers of the telcos, such as Gen AI, computer vision, solutions like massive IoT, AR/VR capabilities. So imagine the opportunity to add these new value-added services that will be based on developers accessing this container platform at your edge and offering your enterprise customers edge cloud services. So I think the opportunity is massive for our telco customers to embrace this technology and accelerate the adoption.
Leon, that's great. Nice positive way to end our live program because we are out of time. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us for this live show. And that is a wrap for this year's Cloud Native Telco Summit. Thanks to all of those who submitted questions. We did try and cover as wide a range as possible in the limited time we had available, but your input is absolutely invaluable. Now, if you missed any of our programs featuring all of these industry experts, then you can watch them on demand from our website. It's been an incredible 3 days. We will be back next month for the AI Native Telco Summit, a brand new addition to our DSP Leaders coverage and a very exciting one. Until then, thanks for watching and goodbye.